This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Rebecca Vickers, and we're going to talk about digital marketing. And the focus on this episode, we're going to talk about you can't create in chaos, and we're going to talk about your story. But before we get to the overall theme of this episode, we always ask every guest a couple questions before we get to the heart of your story. What motivates you, and why do you do what you do?
Oh my goodness, that is a great question, Phantom. I think that the quickest answer would be having a sense of purpose and knowing that I can't do anything alone, right? But my faith in God and the strength that He gives me and the sense of purpose, and that I can make an impact in small ways. And with the team that I work together with and serve, we can do really great things in the space that we are dominating and living in. So for me, it comes down to faith and purpose and the people around me.
So you're in you're the VP of operations at FMO Media. Is that currently where you are?
Absolutely.
And you spend time like coaching your team and cultivating direct client relationships. And you talk about successful strategies. We'll probably dive into that, but it's like empowering is like a theme, right?
Absolutely.
Empowering.
And that's where that idea of purpose and the people come from to Phantom, is how can we make sure that whether it's the team members that we're working alongside and serving or the clients that we're working with, how can we empower them to develop really great strategies to work together in a collaborative way? How can we create better marketing and better leaders in the space that we're working in? And so I love the idea of empowerment, because you're also not a victim there, right? You get to take ownership, and it's not about the lack and what you don't have, but it's about pushing beyond what those perceived limitations are and finding solutions. And the team that I work with, I'm really blessed. They are an amazing problem-solving team. So we're very positive, still realistic. You have to still be realistic, right? But we're a very positive-minded bunch. We figure things out together and we collaborate together. And we want the same with our clients too.
Well, I think that's really cool to have a very collaborative and it's like tend to term it in this phrase I call like expansive thinking. So it's expansive thing is like the kind of reverse of like the narrow-minded focus that people get. And in the arts, it's like some people will get into like, well, I'm a jazz guy, right? I'm a bebop jazz guy, and that's all I'm going to do. Or I'm just a bluesman. That's all I'm going to do. And what you find is it's not usually true, because like people pull from other disciplines, they from other genres. And when you grow, you tend to be pulling from like a wider palette of things. That you do have to have your 10,000 hours to get good at what you know, right? What, if you're a
Oh,
bass
yeah.
guitarist, you learn the bass, you learn your piano. But from there, you start to grow and start thinking, like, what happens if I break the rules? What if happens if I bend things to the like the edge of the bell curve? And you tend to, that
Yeah.
might be a little scary because you're not an expert, but you have kind of mastered some other things, so you can dip your toe in the deep end and not drown.
I love that mindset. You're right. It takes that growth mindset and understanding that practice makes progress. And you understand that as a musician for sure. And you're right. You can have that cross functioning kind of development that helps you grow. So you can pull from all of those functional areas, all of the wonderful different passions and hobbies and insight we have from the various aspects of our life. And I love that you mentioned that too, because I have a theater and film background. So I'm able to pull on that experience to be able to help tap into the problem solving, the creativity, and understanding that there are so many wonderful nuances to us as human beings that we don't have to compartmentalize ourselves. And so I love that you mentioned that, because you're absolutely right.
Yeah, because everybody's telling their story. Like every day, every time you get up before breakfast, like you talk to your wife, you start telling a story right there. You talk to your kids, you go to work. Your people have they communicate, and how you phrase things and how you kind of scope out your vision becomes like your world. So if you have a world where you're saying you can't do it, you won't do it, there's no way it can happen. Well, that's going to frame it. If you have
Mhm.
this kind of, a mindset where like, why not, have little wins and not think I'm losing all the time. Like, to not just look at, like, because in software design, we have a lot of iterative development. We have, like, the agile mindset. So,
Mhm.
we used to have this waterfall mindset, and sometimes we still have both. Sometimes we have a hybrid. But the idea is, like, with iterative, is like, yeah, you could make a mistake, you could miss a goal, or you could find something was unexpected. And so what you didn't know yesterday becomes the update for tomorrow, and on your phone, you see it all the time with all your apps. Why are they updating? Because, like, what we knew yesterday is not what we know today.
Oh, I love that. I love agile, and I love that you mentioned that Phantom because it is that Kaizen, right? That the Japanese philosophy that is constant steady improvement, and you definitely understand that from tech. And I feel like now more than ever we can apply it to other industries, other types of vocations that people are working in, whether it's our professional or personal life. How important is it to be adaptable and to be flexible? Because to your point, there's always that constant change, right? And they're constant reminders of change. In fact, change is the only constant.
Yeah.
So if we're going to progress, then we have to adapt and we have to grow. And I almost feel like, you mentioned it, the kind of limiting belief system can really stall our own progress. I feel like us limiting ourselves is even worse than having someone like an employer or maybe they're a mentor or a colleague or whomever limit us and put us in a box. It's worse when we put
Yeah.
ourselves in a box.
Box. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
in the box is like, I've been in the cubicle, and now I actually work remotely because I work with a startup, and we've got the mindset, we actually do more work remotely than I ever did being a road warrior, because I was always on the plane, in the hotel, or in Uber. So I spent all the time traveling, all the time doing other things other than doing the work. Now I actually can focus on the work. But the idea of this like in the box, mindset. A lot of corporations say they want somebody like in the bell curve. They want somebody
Mhm.
that's going to be that creative person, but then they throw them in a box. Well, how are
Mhm.
you going to put lightning in a bottle and
Yeah.
expect it to be thinking outside the box? It's like, well, you want to capture it. Well, it's kind of hard to capture lightning in a bottle.
You're right. Well, I mean, it's a value that we have at FMO Media for our team. And it's the idea that you want to think like there is no box. And it can be hard even for people to wrap their minds around that, or it can be hard for team members who are coming from a place where maybe they were pigeonholed, maybe they were put in a box, maybe it was, well, this is how we always do things kind of conversation. And you're right, like it can be kind of hard to decondition people from that idea. And it's not that the box or the lack of a box isn't structure. I know we'll get a little bit into that too. You need structure. I think structure can actually set us free to create and be even more creative. But when you put someone in the very confines and you limit their ability to push beyond their own limits, then that's where you get the stifling. That's where I think you also get some micromanaging too.
Yeah,
And instead of like, I'm not, and when I think about like putting people in a box, it's saying this is your role and this is all you can do. And
yeah,
I know you're not going to get, anywhere beyond that versus, hey, I see your talents, I see your abilities, I see your hard and your soft skills. Let's see where some opportunities lie that you can develop them better and stronger and in ways that we can align your strengths and opportunities together for bigger impact, greater purpose, longer career pursuits or different kinds of pursuits that'll be really fulfilling and purposeful. There's that purposeful word again, but purposeful for the team member and also purposeful, we're talking like from a company point of view for the company as well, too.
yeah. Because a lot of times, if you think about like a startup mentality, when I've been in startups, like I could have multiple hats. In some cases, one day I might be a QA tester, next day I might be an architect, next day I might be a manager, next day I might be a business analyst. It's like whatever is needed at the time, you ramp up to. And when you have an environment that's willing to see that you can actually rise to the occasion
Mm-hmm.
and do what's necessary for at the moment. Um, and some people might not like that because of what they want to refine things. And you got to know yourself. You got to kind of look at that looking glass. So say, what's your tolerance for change.
Right.
But there's tolerance, like I've dealt with, like,
Yeah.
this mindset of, in music, like in modal jazz, you have this idea of like there's no bad note, there's an opportunity. Now we played 10,000 hours and you know your instrument and you know how to kind of play by ear. You can
Yeah.
hear it. So if somebody plays something that's unexpected, you can actually adjust to the song. I mean, there's examples of Herbie Hancock and Miles Davis talking about this, where they were playing a piece, and Miles played well, Herbie Hancock played a chord that wasn't part of the song. Miles actually changed his part to match Herbie's chords. Well,
Wow.
that's because they're master musicians. They kind of know, like, in situational awareness, they could do that. If you hadn't done the work, you
Yeah.
might not be able to do that. Or if you were a classical musician and you're looking at it to be a Chopin exactly what is in that piece, you
Yeah.
might say, well, it's not going to work. But if you're in a different mindset, but say, hey, I can evolve the song. So that's a frame where, like, oh, the song isn't stuck in the way that it was originally written. You could actually change it. And that, to me, it's like, well, that's music, but you can apply what I just said to almost anything.
You must have kind of read my mind because I was thinking about jazz earlier, probably because I knew it was coming on the show and the connection to music that you have. But I was thinking about that too, because there are a couple of great things you just mentioned, and it's the idea of mastery and knowing yourself, right? And I would extend that to knowing your team. So whether you're creating music and you're a band or a group, or you are a company, you do need to know your team. And you first highlighted that, and know yourself and figure out what are my strengths or what are my passions or pursuits, so that you're not stuck in that kind of vicious cycle of maybe chasing something that isn't really going to fulfill you or isn't really aligned with those strengths. And that's a whole other topic too, right?
Yeah.
And then the other side that you also were mentioning and talking about is that you can have structure in music, and there are some well known forms to it. Even in jazz, you have your improvisational sections. And yet, if you know what is in your control so well, you can have that freedom to create and respond back to each other and stay still within the structure of the jazz music and
Yeah,
within
the
the
song
structure.
itself, yeah. You can
Yeah,
have certain section movements or certain pieces that you can come back to.
right,
So a lot
exactly.
of songs will have a structure, but then there's places where they could go off and then come back, go off, come back. And that gives you this kind of freedom that the piece is like got these open spaces in it where the band drummer can go off, bass player can go off, trombone player, but you can kind of go off and come back, go off and come back. And a lot of times in life, people don't feel they have that. They don't feel they got that open space. They've been kind of told, it's like, well, you got this closed canvas. It's like
Yeah,
limited canvas is like you only can do this. You can't do that. What if you do that, you'll get in trouble.
yeah. I've even felt that in the creative world too, to a degree. And I feel like it alludes to what you were also mentioning earlier, the idea that, I mean, for us, and this kind of gets to the understanding of order, we crave order, whether we're organized, we want to call ourselves very organized and tidy or not. And so for us to help identify and align with people or understand ideas better, we tend to categorize or label something. And I think that's where it can be challenging for some of us, even in the creative professions, to have the structure, but then feel free to play, whether it's in music, whether it's theater, whether it's film, and go beyond what is the label or what is the lane. I've heard many times people that have said, well, I'm just going to stay in my lane.
Me and my lady, yeah,
And yeah, what if we actually merge and we still move forward together,
people are
What,
so scared of like the instability or chaos, right?
yeah,
You think they think it's like, well, if I get out of my lane, it's gonna be chaotic. Like if I get out of this, like
yeah,
here I can phone it in. I know it. I can stay comforted. And maybe I don't progress and I'm upset about that, but it's what I know. So people tend to go away from fear to safety, which could lend to like you're stagnant. You're being stagnant. You're in stagnation. That
yeah.
you're not really moving. You're just staying in place. You're kind of just in a loop.
Exactly.
Eventually, that becomes discomfort.
Yeah, that can be uncomfortable in and of itself. You're right. It doesn't lend itself. I know it certainly can't lend itself in the tech world and the work that you're doing, because tech, like you and I were chatting before we hopped on here, it's constantly changing, right? I got an update from my computer last night. Zoom updated on me. The algorithms, social media algorithms are always
Shifting,
changing.
yeah, so whatever your SEO is like yesterday is not what it is today. So
Yeah, yeah,
so things
exactly.
are always, like, shifting so much, and people are like, "Well, how am I staying ahead?" But, yeah, it's just, I think it's interesting because like, you have to come up with systems or
Mhm.
processes or theories or, ways to, like, mindset or, what we could talk about in terms of, like, systems that you've created. I'm gonna seg into that. But this idea, like, you got the world is kind of out there in the wild. You go in the forest, go in the wilderness. Like you have stuff that's like looks like it's stable, but there's a little, things. Nature is nature. The world is the world. So there is some like chaos theory going on. So how do you manage that? How do you actually find a way to feel comfortable in the windstorm?
Yeah. Well, so there's a lot there that we could talk about and divert the conversation around too. But understanding, I think first it starts, especially if you're a leader in operations or any type of leader in business, understanding that there is going to be change and that it's going to be more helpful for you, your team, and yourself if you acknowledge that there's going to be change. Acknowledging, I was talking to several leaders on my own podcast about this in terms of leadership and team development. And it's going to be better if you acknowledge with your team what they may or may not be losing in the change and what you're going to gain and benefit. So it's not just about buy-in, but it's also about, okay, what could we possibly be losing? What's the trade-off? I like to think of things in terms of trade-offs too, because
Mhm.
there's typically going to be some kind of trade-off. And what are we working towards? Keep that vision, that mission, and your values in sight constantly so that you have those as your guiding light, your guiding principle. And those can also be your guardrails when you navigate change. And then we can say, from a normal business operations point of view, but especially when you're in digital marketing, there's no necessarily normal day, right?
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know?
things are always shifting, like you said, like algorithms on your platforms that you're trying to be on to
Yeah,
like pull sales or get people interested so they actually click and
yeah,
follow through and actually purchase, So it's like you can, well, how many clicks did I get? Well, how many conversions did I get? You know?
right.
It's like everybody's like, oh, I got all these views, but how many people actually watched like more than a minute, more than 2 minutes, more than 3 minutes? It's like how many
Oh,
people
yeah.
actually went through and actually hit the subscribe? Actually hit the like. They watched it, but they didn't hit the like. They watched it, they didn't subscribe. So, like, how that's where, like, it seems like, there's a high level examples, but like that's kind of where things are, right? You got to get conversions.
Well, that's a great example, Phantom, because I'm sure you do that with your podcast here too. You're always looking at the data. What does it tell you? Is it resonating? Do we need to change things? Do we need to either change our tactics, or do we need to consider the strategy and what's working or what's not working? So you're absolutely right. There's change on that level. And at the same time, especially as a business, we need to be able to meet and exceed the expectations that our clients and our customers have for us, right? And it's going to be really hard to do that if we don't have standards. So making sure that as a business you have operational standards. What are your processes? What are your SOPs? What are the policies that you implement? And then that's where you also want to make sure you're not getting stale and stagnant, because you need to constantly review and check and update and make sure that whatever process, whatever SOP you have is aligning with any of the changes that you're making too. And
Mhm.
so that is as important, I think, in order to control the chaos of change or the potential chaos. You have to have order within the company, and that will free you up to be agile, to be more creative. The team that I work with, for example, we have a ton of training. We have hackathons to help develop our skill sets and solve new problems. We create mentorship programs for our team members to be able to develop their skills individually. and as a group, it's incredibly important that we stay sharp and cutting edge so that we can dominate in what we do, right? And dominate in a good way. We want to be the leader of what we're working on, whether it's content, whether it's strategy, and making sure that we're engaging our clients and their audiences along the way. And it would be incredibly hard for us to deliver consistent service to our clients if we didn't have a really strong system. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. And we can go down a couple of different paths, but tell
Yeah.
me what you think of that. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think, yeah, it's like hard today for people to get a hold on. They're like, there's all these balls in the air. And tendency is like, well, how am I going to work on all of these? Like, you want to have a holistic point of view. Is like, maybe there's all these pillars to my business, right? But maybe I focus on one thing because I say,
Mhm.
well, that's one thing I could get right. But a lot of times it's like you need to have effort to like lift like your whole, like if you think about a person, if you don't take care of your health, but you spend all your time trying to do like six pack abs, you don't have the nutrition to actually support that, and then you also might not have the mental state to support that. So this focusing on going to the gym without the nutrition, without the sleep, without the other things, isn't going to work. So I would think the same thing goes into business, right? You have these things to stay healthy, but you have like warning flags on whatever what are the foundational elements, like the way the body is, you know.
Yeah.
You just keep it simple, but that's what I'm trying to relate.
That's a great, well, I love that. I also have a background in fitness too, and you're absolutely right. And a little bit to your point as well, if you're going for a certain type of physique, you have to know your own body and what you're capable of too. In the same way that a business needs to know itself and be able to identify your mission, your vision, your values, and go from there. What's the high level into some of the operational details and beyond to make sure that the functions of your business are set up for success. And there's so much, we could go on and on.
Yeah, yeah.
I feel like we could have a series there too, Phantom, but the understanding from an operational point of view that your business has a value chain. And so what's the end to end value chain, and how do all of the functions of your business communicate together, whatever your business is, whether it's service, whether it's product. We want to make sure that those are functioning, those functions are talking together. And that, in my opinion, as much as you want to grow, you need to simplify and trim down your system so that they're not overly complicated and complex.
Yeah, keep it
And
simple.
keep it simple. Yeah, simple systems will scale. And then at the same time, while you're simplifying and removing any of the fluff in your systems, you also need to grow your team. And you need to, we'll get back to that word you mentioned earlier, empower. You need to empower your team to be able to make decisions, to run each of those functions or the teams within those functions, so that you don't have to do it all if you're the business owner or the CEO or the higher executive team, right? We have to be able to empower our people to make those decisions so it doesn't bottleneck. And
Yeah, that this top-down decision processing rather than, like, you think on the floor. Like, if you've got people on the assembly line and they see a problem, right? But then they gotta send it to the engineer, and then the engineer has to run it through the committee, and then you gotta get it approved by the committee. So you see a problem on the floor, maybe they could solve it, but you don't empower them to solve it because it's gotta run through a chain. It becomes this bureaucratic chain. It's like, then you're not agile enough to actually solve the problem. You're still putting out garbage in, garbage out, right?
right.
If that process takes 3 months, for 3 months, you were still you had a problem and you didn't solve it because the process was more important than solving the problem.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that is a great way to summarize it. You have experience. This isn't foreign to tech, I know, too. There's a lot of similarities and overlap. But yeah, absolutely right. And then, well, speaking of tech, too, there are, I think we still need to be cautious in what we automate, because I kind of preach only automate what you know, meaning that if you
Yeah,
start to automate, yeah, if you're like, well, I think maybe I'll automate this thing over here, but you don't understand how this widget is made, or you don't understand the element to a person's job and role, and you just go in and try to automate it, it's going to get messy. It might not work out the way that you probably imagined because you don't even understand the process fully. So you really have to be careful what you're automating and understand it very well. I like to think of automation as kind of cleaning up the tedious tasks for us and doing the heavy lifting in the same way that AI can do the heavy lifting in our job, and don't remove the human element. Let's not automate or use AI to tackle the human element of our job, whether it's a one-on-one with a team member or engaging with our stakeholders, whether they're clients or internal stakeholders. Really thinking through, like, okay, what do I hate to do that's tedious, time consuming, that's maybe computer driven, that I can then free up my time for the fun creative stuff, or engaging with people and developing my team, or developing new product ideas or service offerings, etc.
Yeah, because sometimes what happens, like if you're looking at a spreadsheet and you see a cost, but you might not understand the value. Like, so say you're saying, oh, this cost of the quality assurance team is spending too much money checking the quality of this particular thing, right? So if it's just like some widget, it doesn't matter. But what if it's a critical thing? Like, what if it's something on an aircraft, like something in something, a fail point, right? And you don't see the profit in spending time to make sure it's right and making sure that the tolerance level is like, it's got to be like 99.9. He said, well, we'll drop it down to 98.1, right? But you're not an engineer.
Yeah.
You make that decision as an actuary or an accountant, but you're not an engineer. You don't understand, like, the fail point could be catastrophic. Like, just by changing that, you think you're saving money, it's like you're costing money.
Yeah. Well, what another great insight into that understanding too, like you have to get the feedback from your team and the insight in the decision making. In fact, like the further the management team is removed from whatever the problem is, the less maybe impact they're going to have in that decision making. And so we have to get close to the problem. And who's the person close to the problem? It's probably going to be the one who's creating the work or doing the work, right?
Yeah. The problem is that you get these outside, somebody that says, oh, I'm going to get rid of, like somebody who's like, a meteorologist that studies hurricane behavior. He said, well, I can make the AI do that. I say, well, the AI doesn't have a PhD in meteorology.
Right.
So the AI can only be taught on what it was given.
Yeah.
If it's not at the level of that PhD, it's like, say I had a guy that's 30 years as a PhD, and he hasn't seen all the. There's no way that everything that's in his head is in the library. But there are people who believe the machine learning libraries have all that. That's a bad place to be.
Well, and you know what else they don't have? They don't have imagination like you and I have imagination. So they can cull from everything that's already been created out there. But you and I are going to problem solve and creatively think through a problem better because we have our imaginations.
Yeah.
And we can leverage the technology to help us maybe get to a solution faster and explore avenues, or work through decision-making models maybe a little bit quicker, so that we can then save the brain space. And that's kind of what I mean too, but like, how are we using automation, AI to take away the heavy lifting so we are freed up to use our imaginations and go beyond that?
Also, it's also like, if you use it as a tool that gives me, like, it can go through the models and give me more options and give me the options faster. So let's say it gives me a bunch of what ifs. If I did the what ifs, I can only come up with 5. If I give it to the machine, it comes up with 50. Well, now I can look at those 50s and I make a human decision based on my experience. But the problem I have is when somebody says, well, I can make the algorithm make the decision on the 50, rather than putting a human in the chain. When you pull the humans out of the chain, like in music, like you can pull a human out of the decision on production of a song. And then you have the AI say, oh, make it sound like this, make it sound like that. It can do it, and it will do it. So 20 years ago, it couldn't do it at all. Now it can. But compared to the actual human engineer, recording engineer, it doesn't sound like a human did it, right? There's something about like the human sense of creativity and microtonal things. So these things, like, yeah, the imperfections actually make art. So if you actually make it too perfect, it sounds antiseptic. It feels artificial. It doesn't feel real,
Yes, and
and
that's the
that's
same thing.
imperceptible to some people. They don't get it.
Yeah, no, but that's just, you're absolutely right. That's the same thing with writing, with any kind of video content too, with strategy. I'm so glad you shared that because I feel very much that same way about, we can use ChatGPT, we can use Grok. I do. I love those platforms and more for helping me, pull some ideas, and we can input and get some really great strategies or tactics from them for our digital marketing. But to your point, and this is a point that I like to make too, the platform, the AI does not have the experience that I have. It doesn't have the ability to imagine and create in the same way and make the connectors. But I love that you bring up the idea of imperfection too, because we are flawed, which means that the technology is also going to be flawed anyway, but it's going to try and make it so perfect that it doesn't resonate with audiences in the same way the music isn't going to resonate. The writing is going to feel too polished and perfect, and we're not going to feel that it speaks to us, whether it's poetry, whether it's video content. And so that's why I feel like AI shouldn't be replacing us.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of like the idea, like if you have in the traditional media, you have some segments, like, to give an example, like news. In a news program in traditional media, the person might have 3 or 4 minutes to answer the question. If you go on non-traditional digital media, somebody might talk for an hour, might talk for 2 hours. They get into the depth that you could not do, right? And it might not be to the point where you can bullet point it out, but you actually start to actually pull in, ask hard questions, and you actually get longer answers.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need a little bit more to actually make a decision. If you just want to know the 15-second thing, that's fine. But in 15 seconds, I'm probably going to not know the issue. Probably, I'm a political science major. If you understand the issue, 15 seconds, 30 seconds is not going to do it.
Yeah.
You need a little more depth. You need more information. You need more input. And we live in a society where everybody just wants the 30-second grab.
Right.
Well, that's good for the headline, but that's not good for policy.
Wow. Yeah, we're so much on the same wavelength with this, Phantom. And you're making me think too, well, even podcasts, right? There's a platform, I don't know if you've used it, but it's Descript, and it will help edit your podcast for you. It can create and generate sound bites in the same way that, what is it? It's Notebook LM will also
Like
create
Opus and stuff
podcasts.
too. Yeah, it's like Opus and other things out there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There's so many. I know it's not limited to that one, but you can create a podcast episode where the machine is the
Yeah,
creating these
yeah, I've seen that.
these basic podcast hosts. It's gone so far. I saw one Instagram post about two AI hosts that realized that they were not really human and having this sort of existential crisis within the recording, which is other surreal, otherworldly, mind-boggling, what you will. But when you think about, you're saying that makes me think about how we can craft these conversations that aren't even real, and they're not going to get to the heart.
Yeah.
Yours and mine right now, my grammar is not 110% perfect.
Yeah.
It's, I could use better word choices, or maybe, we reduce the ums, but that's what makes us human. And our passion and inflection and the back and the forth, that is unique to who we are and in our conversation right now.
Yeah, because it's like, do you want to be a film editor to try to get across like a movie script, or are you trying to do something that's like a radio interview that they're like, hey, just let's have a chat, let's have a conversation, let's see what this is about. And I think a lot of people, the podcast is exploding because a lot of people are in this kind of like free form state of kind of modal jazz of approach to podcasts. There are people that like to have very scripted stuff, but there's a lot of people out there, and it seems to be hitting with the new generation, that they don't want it like that. they want it to be in the moment kind of fusion.
Yeah.
And it seems that like even the like even like news like interview podcast are there are lots of live versions now where they're not like just recorded and made perfect, and people had been out there and they had been doing it in the old way, and they said, well, it didn't resonate with the audience. They're actually hitting better numbers when they actually decide to do it from their house instead of a studio, to do it like in their living room rather than doing it in a traditional studio. And they found that the people felt, wow, he's actually, he's in his pajamas doing it, and they feel, oh, he's real. He's like a person. He's not just like some talking head.
Yeah. Well, why do you feel that the current the younger generations, why do you feel like we're getting to that, and that that's what everybody's craving right now? What's your
Like,
theory?
I think they've seen a lot of the stage stuff,
Hmm.
and they don't buy it.
Yeah.
My daughter's 25 and she's like, she doesn't like it. And a lot of people in her generation is like, that doesn't feel real. That feels forced. That feels fake. They want something that feels like to them that somebody's like speaking to them. And if it's somebody, if it looks like an infomercial, it's like tune out. If it looks like the person doesn't really know what's important, at least to that
Mhm.
generation, then they're going to tune out. It's like, well, this person's just talking like they talked 10 years ago, talking like they talked 5 years ago. And it's like, well, that's not where we are.
It doesn't resonate.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that's why we can use the technology, but at the same time we have to keep that heart, that human element. Otherwise, whether you're in marketing or tech or music, theater, you're not going to connect with your audiences if you can't reach them as a human.
Yeah. Cause like, you see a lot of ads today in their marketing, and I see people like mimicking like podcast, like as the advertisement. They're acting like they're a podcast, and then they pitch a thing, and they're like sitting on their couch saying, "Yeah, I like this. I like this tool," and then they're making jokes, and it's like they don't seem like they're a professional actor.
You're
They
right.
they're like an influencer, or they're some kind of person that's not what you would expect to be doing that. It's not
Yeah.
like what it was, and people are starting to say, "Hey, that works." If people take too much of it, and then it's gonna burn it out. So like things will shift in this thing. If people they see the cat video, like you have to change the way you do the cat video, or people are gonna say, "Well, that's old."
Yeah, there's tried and true, but then there's also just stale.
Yeah.
And you're right. One of my pet peeves is actually the fake faux podcast where you're not actually even talking to anyone. You're just setting up what looks like a podcast, and you're trying to sell me on something. That feels very disingenuous.
Yeah.
It's different if it's like, well, I'm trying to record content. Okay, that's one thing. But yeah, that the advertising around that, it lulls you into this kind of fakery that is not going to build the trust that we need as marketers for sure, and businesses in general, with the audiences we are hoping to attract.
So what's the new strategy, for this space where people don't want maybe what was done? I'm a child of the '70s, and it's like, oh, I remember the Tide commercials. I remember this. I remember the Coca-Cola commercials. It's like, oh, they used to have these really elaborate songs in
Yeah.
the Coke and the Pepsi commercials, and it's like they had like a lot of work into it. Now I'm like, well, it's different now. Is that actually working the way it worked back then? Is that actually connecting with the people?
Well, there are two things there I think to keep in mind, that while the world is constantly changing around us, human behavior doesn't change. And by that I mean you and I can change and we can grow and we can adapt, but human behavior and what is universally true about humans and how we behave has not changed. So there is the psychology element and understanding human behavior and what drives us. And then what we're also talking about is the consumption of content, the channels in which we're consuming that content, and the preferences that have changed either as a response to or in a sort of leadership sense, leading the way for those platforms to change too, right? And what you're talking about, that idea of authenticity and being genuine, I feel like that's what we need to still hold on to and kind of remove the idea of perfection, right?
Hmm.
Practice makes progress. And how do we communicate in a way that connects? We have to understand our audience. We're talking about understanding our team and understanding ourselves in order to grow. Well, we have to understand our audience and what is human behavior, and then what are the channels and the types of content that people are consuming, that people are enjoying. And also remember, I'll give this as a little side note. Social media is about engaging, right?
Hmm.
It's social media. People are looking for connection, and it is going to be so much harder to connect with faceless content if you're a business. I'm not talking about, content creators and people having fun and entertaining. I really mean businesses are going to have a lot of a harder time if they don't find a way to connect as humans with the people they're trying to attract, especially in the service industries, especially there in the professionals. And so for us as professionals, how are we connecting with our audience and leveraging instances like this, right? Where we're live, it's unfiltered, it's not perfect. You have a really great system for your podcast and there's a structure to it. And you and I know what we're going to expect within this podcast. Your audience also has been conditioned because of the longevity of your podcast to know what they can expect to a degree from your podcast. There's still the element of potential surprise. They're looking for the value. And it does come down to what's the value that I as a human can give. And
Hmm.
that's what we need, is what is the value driver? What's the human connection? And do we understand our audiences and what they crave? I had a really great guest on my podcast talk about this too. It's not enough for a business to fulfill a need and a want. We have to remember that people are after, they're craving certain things in life, whether it's freedom, whether it's a certain kind of lifestyle, whether it's wealth. And you're going to be way more successful. And you have to define what that means for you. What is success for you as a business? But you're going to be way more successful in reaching your goals when you understand what does your audience crave and need. Are you fulfilling that problem, that area for them? And are you reaching them in a way that also isn't that clickbaity kind of icky
Yeah.
content that your daughter feels? Yeah. So a little bit of a long-winded answer, but what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, because I think a lot of people get pulled into the clickbait, and then they get, maybe that worked, but then people feel like they got burned.
Yeah.
And so if you can have a value proposition where it's not, you're not getting the clicks through clickbait, where, that person might say, well, I'm going to find a way to avoid that. So they're not coming back.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you get, like, how do you use data analytics? How do you do like research to actually figure out, like, what is your value proposition and what is it that your customer craves? Can
Well,
you actually do that work today? And like, do people do that level of market research, or are they just looking at, like, metrics and data visualizations to figure out what's going on based on like what's traffic on the net and stats and stuff like that?
I think a wise business should be, depends on where you're getting your market research. Some of it could be stale, right? And
Hmm.
consider how things change and how the market shifts and
Yeah,
adapts.
is that the old world? Is like, is all the market research still stuck in like 5 years ago, 10 years ago? And
Right.
is there a new level of market research that's actually more relevant?
Exactly. And that's where AI can come into play, and you can use all the wonderful platforms and software that's out there for that. I wanted to highlight too something that you had started to talk about earlier, the idea of story too, because humans now, especially in our content, people are resonating with the data and they want to get that. They find a connection to when we share data online, but we really are gravitating more towards the storytelling aspect, because and this kind of goes back to the story brand hero's journey, understanding that we want to see ourselves as the hero in your story. So we have to be really good at storytelling. And this is where you're not going to be clickbaity if you follow through on the promise of the value that you're going to deliver. So you have to understand, yes, you can do your research. Yes, you can get insight into what your audience wants. Hopefully you've done that and continue to do that as a team, as you're starting your business. Otherwise, your product or your service probably isn't going to have a long lifespan if you're not fulfilling whatever that need is, right? At the same time, you have to understand, how does your audience see themselves in the story, the journey of your service and what you have to offer them, or how they're using your product to make their lives better and to support them in their journey. So that, I think, is a really important key element. And it's not something that we've lost. Storytelling goes back since the beginning.
Yeah, that's like the way I think humans, learn best from like oral history,
Yeah.
and they learn best. Like when I was at college, it's like I had a lot of teachers, like they did the oral, exam, like you actually had a blue book, but sometimes you actually had to do an oral exam where they asked you questions, and you had to like respond back the way the teacher, well, the professor had kind of told you the story through his lectures. You had to give it back to him with a critical thinking lens, and it wasn't just like A, B, C, D, E, right, wrong. You had to actually tell a story. You had to actually pull it together, which I don't know in the way the world is today, if enough people are getting kind of the Socratic method or the critical thinking method of actually not just a multiple choice,
Yeah.
but to actually listen, critically think, and come up with your concept of what you just learned, and did you get it right? Do you apply that lesson in a way that makes sense? And maybe there's not the one right answer. There's your answer given the lens, but the professor could determine, it's like, hey, yeah, you're on the right path, which kind of shows you that there wasn't just one way to do it.
Well, and Phantom, that is a great reason too that we can't let AI do all of our writing for us. It's not going to be able to think critically in the way that we can think creatively and critically. It can do, again, like back to that heavy lifting, it can do some of the heavy lifting for us. But for us to be able to formulate our own thoughts, writing it out and practicing and being able to talk it out and talk it through, and the same way we're talking through and sharing ideas, we have to keep that and we have to practice that. That's how we'll strengthen our minds too. So you're absolutely right. I love where our brains are at today.
When it's sort of like communication, because I live in a remote kind of world in my work, like in the work on the podcast and the work I do in my day job as a software guy. Now
Yeah.
I used to live in a world where I would be, a road warrior, and I fly to Japan, go to Minneapolis, go to Texas, whatever, go wherever I had to go, be there, and there's value in being there, right? There's
Yeah.
value in being on the client site, but like in the remote setting, there's a certain level of I don't know, etiquette or being able to be like present, like,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to have the best of the remote experience. You've got to apply the same kind of listening skills. You got to have some level of etiquette or whether or professionalism, and then like open mindedness, and just being, are you participating or are you kind of half stepping?
Yeah, there's so many different distractions. And to your point, there's a benefit to being remote. There are also cons. There are pros and cons to either, right? And I have definitely experienced the kind of learning curve of leading a team remotely, and how do you keep people engaged when they have notifications going off, they have their phone, they can seem like they're attentive, but their mind and their eyes could be distracted on something entirely different and not yourself. So you bring up a really great point. That's another topic around too. I think how do we as people stay engaged and focused in a remote work setting, and what are some of the tactics and tools around that? Because that's even more reason in my mind that you need to make sure that you have organization, that you have a structure, so that when there's a distraction or a deviation, it's easier for people to come back into focus and to re-engage.
Yeah, because also we're in a global world, and so if I got a team that's in like India, or I got a team that's in Japan, and I got a team that's in Germany, you might assume that the business culture is the company culture of your organization, but your organization has branches in these countries. And when I lived in Japan, there was a different mindset, right?
Yeah.
A different cultural process. There was like a zero defect mindset. There was no one above, ideas coming from the floor. The Kaizen is like this different. And an American division sometimes came to like head loggerheads. And they would like, he's like, hey, why are you guys spending all your time on the level 10 defect? Well, we want zero defects. Like, so we don't consider that a low level defect. It's a high level to us. So it's like, so we would get these, kind of fights between the divisions based on where they were. And so it's like the negotiation was like, and then who felt they were like alpha, who's running the organization?
Wow.
Is America running it or is it Japan running it? It's like, who's running it?
That's wild. But I can totally understand that. And that resonates too, because you need to be open. It kind of actually brings us full circle to that understanding of being agile and open when you're working with different teams that are multi-global. How are we staying open and curious to their work ethic, their culture, the way that they communicate, perhaps, or even going so far as the definition of words and making sure everybody understands. We might be speaking the same language, but it might not be that person's first language. They might speak it perfectly, but yet we have slang or colloquialisms, depending on where we are in our current location, that might not translate.
Yeah,
And
there's stuff that doesn't translate. In Japanese, there were like kanjis that meant a lot as a kanji, as a single symbol, that we didn't have an equivalent kind of concept. Translated, it seemed like it did, but in terms of the understanding, it wasn't. So we ended up having to use activity diagrams and like flows to actually get to certain points, because the words were like not working, because they were having different impacts. So we needed to have like really clear cut flows that could be no doubt what this meant, to actually like get people to understand, on the same page. Because the wordy document being translated from Japanese to English or English to Japanese, there was a lot of disconnects. So we had to bring it down to like very like bulleted points and flow charts and things that we could get consensus on.
that's a great solution to a challenge, though. I love that you figured that out. Visuals.
Yeah, well, visualization, like we are visual people. Our dreams are like, tell us things, and like it's visual.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
everything is like, so like if you can get into that visual understanding, you can get better. People will actually get what you're saying if you can actually, that's why data visualization is like a big thing in IT now. But I think, yeah, we always go a little bit longer than we wanted to sometimes. But I want to stay here longer, but I do have another show, and
I,
maybe we'll have to come back, because like, there's a lot that we kind of, a couple of times we said, oh, we could have gone there, we could have gone here.
yeah. I think we just talked around like maybe 5 other different topics too, Phantom, but this has been a blast. Thank you for having me.
So we have Rebecca, like, Curitan.
Yeah, that's my maiden name, but I go by my married name, Rebecca Vickers. But that is my link tree, on the screen.
So if people click on that, they can get all the ways to connect with you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I love when people reach out and connect. I love being able to share what I know for free. The more we all can share and grow, we can scale together. So I love it.
And that is one of the people know, like, we've been live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and that link tree is fully clickable in the podcast description on those platforms. We will be fully published on all the other platforms that you can listen to and watch a podcast on by tomorrow, like Apple Podcast and iHeartRadio, Spotify video podcast, places like that, Amazon. And I want to thank you for being a guest on the Family Electric Ghost podcast tonight.
Thank you, Phantom, and thank your audience. I appreciate it.
Thank you.